Okay.
We're live.
All right. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. Good evening and good morning. Sorry for the slight delay. We had a bit of technical issue, but we are live now. And yeah, welcome to this webinar. I know a lot of you are curious about the O-1 visa, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So our focus is going to be on the criteria for O-1, how to build your profile, how do you know how to go about the entire O-1 visa. And I'm not doing this alone. I have with me Gabriela Urizar, who is an immigration attorney with ton of experience in the talent visas, and she's from Manifest Law. So, Gabriela, thank you so much for joining us. And we have a lot of people curious about the O1, so over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Gabriela Urizar, and I'm an attorney here at Manifest. I have almost a decade of experience practicing immigration, especially with work visas, talent visas, large IT companies. So I'm very excited to share my experience and also a few examples and answer some questions.
All right. So we have prepared a few decks, a few slides for all of you, and Gabriela will be taking us through that so that we can, cover in detail the criterias for O1, how you can build your profile, and we'll also be stopping for questions now and then. So if you have any questions, keep putting it in the chat box, and as and when we go through the slides, we're going to be taking up those questions. That sounds good, Gabriela?
That sounds good. Thank you for that. Okay, can I start?
Yes, let's begin.
Like I was previously saying, my name is Ana Gabriela Urizar, and I'm an immigration attorney at Manifest, almost a decade of experience working with the largest immigration firm in the world, mainly with firms or corporations in technology, science, and financial sectors. Great, so let's get to the fun part. We have here the difference between the O1 and the O1B. So just as a general information for this type of visa, the O1 is a non-immigrant visa, which requires a sponsorship from an employer or an agent. And we're going to talk more about it later on with a lot of detail. But underneath the O1, we have a distinction of the O1A and the O1B. So it really depends on your profile, your background, the field that you're currently working in or that you're interested in to choose the appropriate category, right? And then we're going to also talk about the pros and the cons of the different type of categories. Let's start with the O1A. So the O1A is reserved for individuals in the sciences, education, business, or athletics. And please keep in mind that these are very broad categories, right? So the sciences could include technology, it could include research, it could include almost every single field of STEM. So it is important this is why it's so important to organize your petition in a clear and concise manner, because the categories are so broad and you can make really an argument in many of them. And then for the O1B, this is for individuals who have extraordinary achievement in the arts. So let's go over the requirements more in detail for the O1A. So for the O1A, you have to meet 3 out of the 8 requirements. So remember, you don't have to meet all of them, right? As long as you meet 3, but usually when you meet with a good attorney or you're trying to strengthen your petition or the chances of getting it approved, a good attorney would try to aim for more than 3. But in terms of a strategy, it is more important to have less criteria, but stronger, than having all of them, but not so much of a strong meeting of each criteria. So for number 1, the receipt of nationally or internationally recognized awards. Number 2, we have membership in associations that require outstanding achievement to join. Number 3, press about your professional or major trade publications or major media. Number 4, judging others in the field or something that's a related field. Number 5, original contributions of major significance. Number 6, creating or being the author or co-author of scholarly articles. Number 7, holding a leading or critical role at a distinguished organization. And number 8, commanding a high remuneration for your services, right? Now we have the O-1B, which is for people who have achievement in the arts. And remember, again, you only have to meet 3 out of all the criteria. So for the first criteria, we have you having a leading or starring role in a production or event. Number 2, recognition of achievements by critical reviews, published materials about you. You want journals, you want media talking about your work, portraying you as well. Number 3, holding a lead or critical role at a distinguished organization. Number 4, record of major commercial or critically acclaimed successes. Number 5, significant recognition from achievements from organizations, critics, government agencies, or other recognized experts. And number 6 as well, commanding a high salary or remuneration. And Sashi, do you want to open the floor for questions if people want to examples of a specific criteria?
Yes. Any questions on these criterias? Let me just take a look at the chat box. So there is a question on eligibility. How do I know I'm eligible for this visa if I've just completed my graduation in UK? Would you be taking up
To
this, yeah, now, or I think later also we're going to dive into this?
Right. So in terms of specific to your situation, when a person has just graduated from college or from a master's, the scrutiny is a little higher in terms of, how can you establish or show that you have achieved extraordinary or acclaim recognition in your field. And many students get overwhelmed with this, but you have a lot of agency when it comes to the O1. For example, if you just graduated, but you have done work, right? Like you have published material, you have been asked to be a speaker, you have gone to conferences and maybe held a chair position. An attorney will be able to examine your entire record, your education, the way that you have contributed within your field, and give you an orientation on the steps that you can take moving forward. So an example that I like to give my clients, especially the ones that are just coming out of school, is to look for a position, for a role at a company that is very well established, right? Like the big names. Make yourself very useful. Try to take part of the different committees that they have. Try to be as involved as possible, because this will meet the criteria for either of these type of visas of leading a critical role at a distinguished organization. But there is so much more that you can do in terms of building a profile.
Right. So for somebody who's just graduated, the first step would be to get a good job relevant to their
Yes,
domain and then start from there. Okay.
exactly.
Got it.
At a distinguished organization that is well known and
Well
that
known.
is distinguished. Also,
We have couple
membership in associations that require outstanding achievement. That's a great one for people who had just graduated to start
Mhm.
looking at, let's say, if they have a fellowship, right? Or applying for fellowships. Fellowships could count as memberships in associations that require outstanding achievement. And they also meet the first criteria of receiving awards. Because if you think about it, a fellowship is an award. You have to apply, you have to compete with other people. And the fact that you're selected
Mhm.
shows that you're recognized for your work. So it meets being in fellowships meets two criteria: the first one and the second one.
By fellowship, do you mean like research positions, like PhDs? Are you referring to that?
Um, Not necessarily. There are fellowships for every single type of field. There are fellowships for like scholarships as well,
Mhm.
like scholarships. Like applying for scholarships, research fellowships. If you're doing a master's, a PhD, all of
Okay.
all of that counts. Basically, when you see that there is a competition, that you have to apply and that you have to compete with other students to be able to get that fellowship.
Okay, got it. We have a couple more questions on the criteria. So the next question says that what would be considered a high salary for an electronics engineer in the Bay Area? based on your past experience? Is 150K eligible for high salary?
It totally depends where you live. So, for example, if you have $150,000 a year in San Francisco, that wouldn't really be deemed as competitive or being higher than everyone else. But
Mhm.
if you have that salary in, like, let's say, a little town in the middle of the US where people with your degree and credentials are making 75K, then that would be considered as high remuneration. And a great way to look into this is, going to like Glassdoor. There is also the Department of Labor in the US publishes the
Mhm.
average salary per area for each degree or field of education. So you can just play around and compare your salary with people in your area. And also keep in mind, it's not just salary, it's the whole remuneration package. So if you're getting bonuses, if you're getting stocks, if you're getting awards, scholarships, all of these counts as well.
Mhm. So you kind of have to figure out the average and then benchmark for your area and also your profession, both.
Right.
Okay. We have the next question. What is the minimum publication reviews you suggest to satisfy the judging criteria?
I think it depends if you have very strong evidence for other criteria, then the number of publications is not as relevant. I will say, less than five will be fine. But if
Mhm.
publications or judging the work of others is the one that you are really emphasizing for your application, I will say closer to 10.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. I think we can take one more question, Gabriela, and then we'll take the rest as in we go along.
Sounds great.
So, this is from Ekta. She says, I have an established business for the last 10 years in India, and I've recently opened a company in the US. I would like to know if I'm eligible for this visa.
So, in terms of if you're eligible, we will have to look at the impact that your company has made in the field, right? So, what is your field? What is the impact that you're making? Are you working with other organizations? Are organizations in the US relying on your work or using you for your expertise? And even though it's not a requirement, something that I've seen throughout the years is that officers love to see that US companies or government agencies are using your work or your research, or there is a need for that in the US, even though it's not a requirement.
Okay, got it. Also, before we go ahead, just a quick note. You also have a chance to book a free consultation with one of the lawyers from Manifest Law, and we'll be telling you more about this as and when we go along. So, for people who are interested, like Ekta, who want to build their profile, a free consultation would really help you. So, yeah, do stay tuned. We're going to tell you more about this. So, Gabriel, I think we can cover a few more slides and take up more questions. Yeah.
Thank you. And just a quick note on that, when you book your consultation, send as much information as possible ahead of the
Mm.
consultation because that really helps the attorney prepare for the call.
Yeah.
So the question that everybody's wondering here, how do I qualify for the O1? From all the criteria that we just spoke about, you must meet three of the criteria. So remember, just three out of the whole list. And
Mm.
most importantly, the government applies that total determination. So this is why I was referring to the question of it depends, right? If one of your criteria is very strong, then you don't really need to do all of them very, very strong. But if you have the ability to apply to as many of them, it would help your application. For the O1A, you have to show that you have sustained national or international acclaim, and it's one of this, and you are within the small percentage of those that have gotten into your field. And this is why it's very important when you are putting your application together, or even now that you're working towards making your profile stronger, to define your field as narrowly as possible, right? Don't just put an application saying that you're at the top of your field in technology. Technology is massive. So if you're very specific, you're able to show that you are within a small percentage in your field. For the O1B, you have to show that you have sustained national or international acclaim. and that you have achieved distinction in the field of the arts. For the O-1B, this is specifically for motion picture and television, you have to show a record of extraordinary achievement in the MPTV industry, such as they have a very high level of accomplishment, evidenced by your degree of skill, how you're being recognized in the industry. And again, when you hear sustain national or international, if you are recognized nationally, that still meets the criteria, right? If you are recognized internationally, then great, but you don't have to be recognized internationally to be able to qualify for the O1. Okay. The other question that I hear a lot is, do I need an employer to be able to apply for this type of visa? And we're going to talk later on about the green card version of this visa. For the green card
Mhm.
version, which is the EB1, you don't need an employer, you can self-sponsor. However, for the O1, you do need an sponsor, and the sponsor can either be a direct employer or it can be an agent in the US, right? So a direct employer will be a company. It's a company that's sponsoring or filing the application on your behalf because they're hiring. And this type of application is a little bit more restrictive. It's employer based, so you do have to stay with this employer and work with this employer for as long as your O1 is valid and it's tied to that employer. If you want to move to another employer, you can file an amendment. But again, it's very employer specific. The agent petition. The agent petition is when an agency, it could be a company as well, or it could be a citizen of the US, if they file a petition on your behalf. For example, this is specific. This relates a lot more for people in the arts. I had a client who was an artist, and he was working on their an employer, like he was a person who was his agent. And because you're working under an agent, you have more flexibility, and you can work for employers, you can work for different projects as well, but it has to be tied to the agent, right? But you have more flexibility.
Gabriel, I think we got a lot of questions on this particular topic, that do I need an employer, or how dependent am I, on somebody in the US? So I think the direct employer is clear, but the agent one, could you elaborate a bit more on how can somebody opt for this route? Even if they're working with a company, do they still have to rely on the employer only, or do they have the option to explore the agent route?
Right. So if you hire by an employer, you have to stay with the employer. Like, you can only work for the employer as long as you have that visa. And what people do is, for example, they get to the US by being hired by an employer, by a company. They have their O1 for a year and a half, build their profile a little bit more, and then they self-sponsor and they apply for the EB1. So that's one of the routes or the options that people can have if they come here with a direct employer. Now, with the agent, again, it could be a person, it could be an LLC, it could be a company, but they're hiring you to bring you to the US. And again, it's usually for the arts, or it's, for example, if you are doing a type of work that requires you to work with different projects or different employers, or even different industry, then this would be a great match. So, like I was saying, with the example for the client that worked in the arts, he was hired by a person that had an LLC. He filed a petition and established himself as the agent of this artist. The artist was able to come to the US with an O1, and the agent was the one that was securing all the projects. So all the projects and the different engagements and the contracts. And again, you have more flexibility, a little bit more flexibility, because you're able to explore different companies. But you're still working under the sponsor, right? So you're still tied to the sponsor. So if the sponsor doesn't want you to work for X company, you can't really work for that company, because you are being sponsored by this agent. And the O1 is owned by the petitioner, not the beneficiary. So you, the foreign national coming to the US, will be the employee, the beneficiary, but the petition is owned by the person filing.
And does the agent route work for any field, like even people in tech? Can they also
I
explore
think
the agent route?
it's a yes, yes. It's less common, but I've definitely seen situations where people are hired by by an agent to come here, especially with AI, because as we know, AI is being utilized in many fields. Even in the arts, in TV, in sets. These engineers are being brought to the U.S. to work on concerts, venues. So definitely, I've seen it with IT.
Okay. And we also had a question earlier that what if I have my own company in the US? I think somebody did have that. So can that company sponsor me? Is that an option to go about this?
It depends on the formation of the company. So, for example, if you founded your company as a sole proprietorship, it's more difficult and it's not really allowed because you and the company are the same person, right? Like there is no distinction. But if
Yeah.
your company was created as an LLC or as a partnership or where there is a corporate distinction between the person, the owner, and the actual company, then there could be the possibility of your company sponsoring you and bringing you to the US under the O-1.
Okay. Got it. Uh, I think, yeah, we can continue. We don't have any questions on this anymore. Yeah. We can probably take up more questions. Next slide. Yeah.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into the agent petition. The requirements has to be a US based agent, a US company, a US citizen, or, for example, one of your employers can act as an agent. There are also vendors in the US that provides these services. Again, right? Many people don't know this, but there are a lot of agents or companies in the US that provide this service of being your agent and then having the opportunity of sponsoring you for a visa. And number two, an itinerary is required. You have to show that you have plans to be here, to come here and to work. Basically, that you have work waiting for you in the US. The way that you show this is by showing copies of contracts. Like, for example, your agent can provide copies of contracts that, these different concert venues require this engineer to come to the US because they have 3 or 4 events coming up. Correspondence between the agent and the different companies requiring your services. And you don't have to have the formal contracts, right? Like if the agent is able to show that there is interest in having you here in the US to provide your services with emails, with letters of intent, that also works as well. You're able to meet this requirement. And a memo, again, right? Showing the simple terms of an agreement. Again, letters of intent, showing that companies are interested in bringing you here is a great way to show that you have work waiting for you in the US. And what are the benefits of having an agent? Well, first, it allows you to work for multiple employers, and one of your employers can be a company you hold ownership interest is, which is answering the question that was previously asked about whether your own company can sponsor you. And then number two, if it's structured appropriately, you have a new opportunity while on the O-1 to do something. Like you don't need to declare it to the US to do it. For example, with an H-1B, if you want to change venues, if you want to change projects, if you want to change location, you have to file an amendment. You have to notify USCIS of the change. The O-1 through an agent provides you a lot more flexibility. You don't have to notify USCIS when you're taking on a new project.
And these contracts have to be confirmed contracts, or is it more of an intent that?
No, if you have confirmed contracts, then great, right? It's amazing evidence, but it's not required. Like you can show letters of intent, you can show emails showing companies interested in your work.
Okay, got it.
So what about self-sponsorship? Like I previously mentioned, USCIS doesn't allow for self-petitioning for an O-1. But if you qualify for an O-1 and are able to come to the US, you are already showing that you meet the extraordinary ability criteria. And this is a really good basis for you to eventually self-sponsor yourself and apply for a green card application based on your abilities in the field. And again, we touched a little bit on whether you can self-sponsor through a company that you own. And like I said, like it really depends on the formation, the corporate formation of your company. So before you do this, please speak to an attorney, especially on the corporate side, because you want to make sure that your company in the US is following all the laws and is properly established in the US.
Got it. So self sponsorship is a no. It has to be through an employer, a agent, or a company if structured in the right way. Your own company.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yes.
got it. Should we take up some questions?
Sure.
All right. Um, so Arjun wants to know: do I need to satisfy all the criteria? I think this you covered in depth. So three criterias, whether it's O1A or O1B, but the more, the stronger your profile becomes, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. What qualifies as a national award and achievement in cybersecurity field for someone with 15 years of experience? Do you have any examples, Gabriela, for national awards in a
Yes.
particular
So
area?
this is a good question. A lot of people think that it's very hard to get awards, but they don't understand that you can actually submit your work to be considered for an award. Like there are a lot of organizations, especially within science, allow for self nomination. Um, there is an organization for engineers in the US that do provide recognition every year. That's one of the examples that I've used for one of my prior petitions. Again, if you apply for a fellowship and you got the fellowship, if you receive scholarships where you had to apply, right? Not just because, let's say, you were born in Canada. No, let's say it has to be because you apply and that you competed with other people. Of course, you have the very big awards, for example, for people in the arts, like an Emmy, a Tony, a Pulitzer, but it doesn't have to be that high of a level. Like it could be a national award or a local award. Something that I tell clients as well, especially people that have been in the industry for such a long time, is that look back at all the organizations that you have worked with, that you have provided some um, things of good things, right? For example, nonprofits. Reach out to them. Reach out to them. Put your work out there. Ask if they do any recognition of contribution in the field. Again, you have to reach out. You have to talk to these organizations to be considered. And I've seen situations where people are able to show that 15, 20 years how they have contributed in their field, and they're recognized.
Do awards within the company count? Like, let's say it's a well known organization like a Google or Apple, and I've got an award from the company. Will that count?
That would count, but I wouldn't just include that award to satisfy one criteria, right? So again, it's a balance test. So if you provide that award, but you're also able to provide information on other criteria, that will be helpful. And also, what are the requirements of the award, right? Like, is this award given to just people in your department, or are also employers from the whole country considered for this award? So it all depends on how you frame it.
Okay, got it. Um, the next question says, I'm making more than 95% of software engineers in New York. I'm guessing he's talking about the salary. And I'm
Mhm.
also employed at a critical role at a distinguished organization about a year ago. Can I use that for evidence?
Absolutely, absolutely. And just make sure that when you're preparing your application, you're able to provide information from reliable sources like the Department of Labor to show how much money are people in your field making in the area where you're working, and also
Mhm.
compare it to your own remuneration. And remember, it's not just salary. So if you're getting bonuses, if you're getting stocks, if you're getting anything else, all of that counts as your compensation package, and you're able to show that it's higher.
Okay.
Now, in terms of the other requirement, I think you mentioned having a critical or leading role in a distinguished
Uh,
organization.
yes. For about a year ago,
Again,
but
when you
is that a concern, the
ag-
timeline?
Yes, that totally counts. They don't really take a look at the length of time. It's more at the level of influence or contribution that you have done in your organization. So
Hmm.
leading or critical role. Really, when you're applying, when you're putting together your application, you really want to put an emphasis on how you do you have any decision making power, even if it's just within your department. How is your role critical to the organization? How is your role leading to the organization? And remember, it can be either leading or critical. It doesn't have to be both. So it's really how you package the information as well. And if you're thinking of applying, let's say next year, not really right now, or maybe in 6 months, start being more involved in your company. Start taking on leadership roles. Start taking on leadership roles in committees. Start volunteering. I know some companies ask their employees to see who's available to go to conferences or to be on panels. Volunteer yourself. This is very helpful, and you are able to meet not only the criteria of having a critical role in a distinguished organization, but also the being on panels, being a trusted expert. So it really knocks out several things out of the requirements.
Yeah, I think that's where knowing about O1 helps, because you just start tuning your profile towards that. Now, once you know that this is what I need to apply. All right. I think we can take up one more question. So I'm a SWE at Google in India working on core tech. How do I leverage that? I have authored two papers and I have done a master's with a thesis.
So for people who have author papers and who have done thesis, what I recommend is creating a Google Scholar profile and putting your work there
Mhm.
and promoting your work, right? And then tracking who is citing your work. The Google Scholar profile is able to tell you where you're being cited. So, for example, if you publish a paper and you see that people are citing your paper that live in different countries, you can show international acclaim. You can show that people from different countries are using your contributions. If you like publishing papers as well, I think continue to do that. Two is a strong foundation, but I wouldn't just use two to establish a criteria, but you are on the right path.
Okay, great. All right. We can continue, Gabriela, and we'll take up some more questions. Okay. Yeah.
So the question that everybody's asking, how do I start to build a profile, especially if you just graduated school, right?
Yeah.
Press. Be strategic about the way that you invest in PR. So, for example, your story has to be compelling. Niche media is okay, and work with a good PR firm, not pay to play. So, be very specific. Again, quality is better than quantity. So, let's try to have media that's reputable, that people trust, especially within your field, to include you, to talk about your work, rather than having hundreds of mentions in, let's say, made up papers or very small or new media outlets. Now, for the judging, this is very important. Again, people have so much agency when it comes to judging. I tell my clients all the time, reach out to universities, reach out to nonprofits. They're always looking for like speakers or for people to be put on panels, or if they have a competition, for people to be able to judge the competition. Most likely they will say yes, but it requires for you to have agency, for you to reach out. Ask your professors as well, right? To be able to help with teaching the class or to reviewing the work of your classmates. Then the next one is the scholarly articles. Your school is a resource. Again, talk to your professors. Ask if there is any opportunity to contribute to a research paper. Again, professors are so busy and so overwhelmed. They are always happy to take on research assistants, right? So if you can do all the research and all the heavy lifting, and even if the main author or the main person on the paper is the professor, if there is any way that you can be added for credit, or your name can be added, this is very, very helpful. And a lot of people don't know this. Trade publications, again, reach out, put out your work, start building that profile little by little. And all of this is more like an overall guidance, But again, if you're very strategic and start working on it and start leveraging the work that you have and also the connections that you have. If you have connections with nonprofits or universities, reach out to them. See how you can be involved. How can you be on a panel? How can you write something for them or contribute? Maybe on a blog, maybe an article. They're always looking for professionals to contribute on and to help. So what is the timeline? The first stage is the development of the evidence that you have. So again, this depends on your profile. It could take between 3 to 12 months to complete. And this is where you really see how much agency you have. So, for example, for people that have just graduated school, it's important to take a little longer than 3 months just to show that you have consistent acclaim or you have contributed consistently to your field. It will raise some red flags to USCIS if you just graduated and in a period of 2 months, you've been published in 30 articles and 50 magazines have talked about you. It's not as believable, right? Rather than if you had just graduated and you have the ability to show, let's say, 6 to 8 months where you have consistently contributed to the field, where you have been mentioned, where you have published papers, where people are citing you, even if it's not as many publications, that shows consistency. Now, for people that have been in the field for 10, 15, 20 years, really emphasize the projects that you work right throughout your career. Do you contributed to a software that's now publicly accessible? How many people are downloading that software? What are the companies that you work with? Even if it was just projects, how impactful was your work, right? Start mapping it up. Start creating a timeline of your career and the contributions that you've done throughout your career. So again, it really depends on the profile of the person and also how many years of experience they have in the field. So the stage 2 is case production. So once you're ready and you feel confident that you have a strong profile, then you're able to move forward and start your case production. It can take about 2 to 3 months to complete, compiling all the evidence, getting organized. And what I tell clients again is the more organized you are, the more clear you are, the more helpful you will be to the attorney. And also the more willing a company will be to sponsor you, right? Um, so for example, if a student has just graduated, but they spend a few months building their profile, they're very organized, they keep everything in different folders, they're able to articulate how each piece of evidence meets a criteria, you're able to speak to an attorney and an attorney can help you prepare a letter or even a meeting with a prospective employer and go to the employer and say, hey, look, I'm interested in contributing to the company. I'm interested in working with you. I understand that maybe you might be hesitant hiring someone and having to sponsor the person for a visa, but I've done my due diligence. I've done my research. I have my profile. This is how much the visa costs. This is what the attorney said. This is the process. This is the stage. I've seen situations where employers have gone from being completely against sponsoring people for a visa because they just think it's so complicated to actually saying yes because the prospective employee was so prepared and organized. So once you're ready to have the case to start for production, like I said, it could take between 2 to 3 months, depending on how organized you are and how fast you give in the materials. And then for the stage 3, once the case is drafted by the attorney, all the forms are signed by the employer, the petition is filed with USCIS, which is the immigration agency in the US that processes this type of applications. If you are inside the US with a different type of visa, let's say a student visa, like an F visa, you can file it as a change of status. So you don't even have to depart the US. You can just file it here. If you are outside of the US, you have to file it still with USCIS, but as consular notification. So once it gets approved, the embassy or consulate in your city gets the notification, you get to schedule your appointment, and then you go to the appointment, you get the sticker on your passport, the visa stamp, and then you're able to come to the US. So in terms of securing that approval, with USCIS, you have the option of filing the case through regular processing, which could take between 3 to 6 months or even a little longer. But if you want a decision right away, you can pay the additional fee to the government for premium processing, and then you'll get a response within 15 business days. And just to keep in mind that the response could be an approval, a denial, or a request for evidence. Very, very, very rare the USCIS will issue a denial without first issuing a request for evidence. I don't think I've seen one in the 10 years of experience that I have. It happens legally, they're able to. But I've never seen it happen. Like usually, if there is something missing or if there is no clarity, they will issue a request for evidence. And then, of course, it's very scary, right? Like people want to try to avoid a request for evidence as much as possible. So this is what I tell my clients. The way that officers review applications are in two stages. When they first get the application, they scan the application to make sure that everything is organized, concise, as on the first look, you establish the criteria. And then if it passes, then it goes to either the same officer or another officers that will do a deeper analysis. But if your petition is disorganized, it's very wordy, very technical, you have documents all over the place, they're going to issue a request for evidence, right? So it's just keeping everything very organized and very clear. So once you file the application, you say you pay premium processing, you get your approval in 2 weeks. That approval notice will likely go to your company or the attorney. The attorney will send it via priority mail abroad to your home address or whatever address you include. You will make an appointment, or they will help you to make an appointment for an O-1. You go to the appointment with the approval notice, your passport, copies of your educational credentials. If you're married and you want to bring your dependents, a copy of the marriage certificate, right, to show the relationship. And then the interview should be pretty standard and pretty easy because you have already met the criteria. They just want to make sure that, you haven't been arrested or that you're still employed, possibly having this offer of employment. You get the sticker on your passport, and then you're able to come to the US.
Is there any big difference in timeline if you are applying from US, within US and outside US, or is it similar irrespective of your location?
I mean, everyone has to apply inside the US with USCIS. You first have to secure that O-1 approval with USCIS. And then in terms of the difference, if you're abroad or outside of the country, is that if you are inside of the country and you really want to depart, you can just file as a change of status. So as soon as it gets approved, automatically you're on O-1 status.
Yeah.
If you're abroad, it depends on the availability of visa appointments in the consulate where you either are a resident of or a citizen.
Yep. But in terms of the filing, the processing, that's the same, right? Irrespective of where
It's the
you
same. Everyone has to
same.
go through the same process with USCIS.
Okay, got it. We have a couple of questions. He says, I have one national level hackathon with 200,000 plus participants, organized by the government of India and other MNCs. So I think he wants to know if this is a good criteria to show.
That sounds very good. That's very impressive. And it sounds like you have a very strong profile already. So now it's a matter of organizing that evidence, right? So for example, you mentioned that you work with the government of India. That's huge. That's very impressive. So what projects have you worked with, right? Like how impactful was your work? What organizations benefited from your work? Are there any organizations in the US that could potentially benefit from that type of work? How competitive it is to get a contract with the government? So it's, again, matter of making the argument and organizing your evidence, but you do have a strong profile, and it's very impressive.
All right. I think the next question is exactly this, that how do I organize the evidence? So are there any tips? Because I think you mentioned how the first impression is how you organize it for the USCIS officer, right? So any tips on this? How do we organize better?
Definitely by criteria. Definitely by criteria. So, for example, the way that I like to organize the evidence for my clients is that I look up the regulations for the immigration code, for the law, and I list the criteria, all the criteria that my client meets, and then I organize it by criteria. And it's okay to repeat evidence, right? To use it for more than one criteria. So it's okay to do that, but as long as you're organizing everything by criteria. So I would say that's the best approach.
All right. If I work as a visiting professor or adjunct professor for multiple employers, can I apply under this category?
Yes, and this category builds a strong profile for eventually doing a green card based on researcher or professor. So it's important to, when you have the ability of the opportunity to come to the US, to try to take a lot of advantage from that opportunity and build a strong foundation so that you're eventually able to apply for an outstanding researcher or professor green card application.
All right. Yeah, I think we can continue. Gabriela? Yeah.
Okay, so let's go over a few questions that tend to come up a lot, especially when we're talking about this visa. We have question number one here. Can I stay in the US while my O-1 is processing? So yes, if the case is filed timely and accurately as a change of status, and you can stay in the United States while the case is pending, as long as you have valid non-immigrant status. So what does this mean? If you are living in the US already under a different type of visa, like F1 or something like that, you can file the change of status here in the US and you can stay in the US. You don't have to depart. But again, keep in mind that at all times you have to keep valid status. So let's say you're on a visa, let's say an H-1B, and then you max out and your O-1 is pending. If you max out and you no longer have H-1B status, you have to depart because you cannot stay in the US without status. If not filed as a change of status, you can still apply for the O-1 for consular approval, but this means that you will need to leave the country to activate the O-1. So, for example, this happens with people who have a different type of visa or they have different opportunities. Let's say your spouse has an H-1B, so you are on H-4. You file for a new O-1. You can do it as a change of status. So automatically when it gets approved, the last move or the last approval by USCIS is the one that prevails. But you also have the opportunity to apply for an H-1B. You can do both, right? You just keep an eye on the strategy. Like if you have an H-1B application pending, but also an O-1, you have to be mindful that the last approval will be the one that, right, like the one that goes into effect. So if you get the H-1B approved, but you no longer want the O-1, but it's pending, make sure to withdraw the O-1. Now, for some reason, if USCIS sees that, for example, you haven't been to the consulate in a long time, or that there's maybe some questions about your student visa, it will likely approve the new O-1, but they will send you abroad. They will tell you that you need to go to an embassy or a consulate abroad to activate that O-1 and then enter the US with the O-1. And this usually happens when people also are under a different status, but they apply for an O-1, but they also want to travel, right? So if you're on an F student visa and then you file for a change of status to an O-1, it gets approved. Now you have O-1 status, but you want to travel, you will, outside of the US, you will need to apply for a visa stamp at a consulate abroad to be able to come back into the US with the new status. Like you can't just use your new O-1 status and then your sticker on your passport that says F1. The sticker on the passport has to match your status for you to be able to travel out and then come back into the US. So question number 2, is it possible to go from F1 OPT or CPT directly to O-1? Yes, you can apply for a change of status within the US and you don't have to go outside the country, right? But again, like I've mentioned throughout the webinar, that if you're a student and you don't have many years of experience, you do have to be very strategic when building your profile, because you do have to convince the officers that even though you're relatively new in your field and you don't have a lot of years of experience, that you are at the top of your field. And this is achievable. They're very talented young people who have just graduated that are doing great things, especially in the IT industry. So it's not a deal breaker.
I think this year a lot of people have done this. Changed from F1 OPT to O1 status. Yeah.
Yeah, but which is a great option for students that
Yeah.
are very scared of the lottery, right? The H-1B, the H-1Bs at the end of the day, it's a great visa, but it's a lottery. You have absolutely no control. So you can be the
Yeah.
most talented, the most hardworking, and still not get it. So a lot of, not a lot, but many students are starting to take a look into the O-1 and
Mm.
realizing that they have a lot of agency, that they could actually
Yeah.
put in the work and get the results.
Yep.
Do you want to take any questions, or do you want to move
Yes.
to the case studies?
I think we can take a few questions and finally go to the case study. All right. So Jay says, I've already filed for a B2 change of status after being laid off from H1B cap exempt role. Is there any risk of filing O1B change of status now? And how do I make sure my status stays clean until approval?
So I think what's most important for USCIS is to see that you're making the steps and attempting to always stay in valid status, and also to have the right intent of mind when applying for visas. So you say you no longer work for the job that sponsor you for the H-1B cap exempt. Okay, great. You file for a B visa to keep yourself here to wrap up your affairs or to look for other opportunities. If you find an employer that's willing to sponsor you for an O-1, you can file the change of status for the O-1. Again, it will depend if USCIS thinks that you need to go abroad and activate the O-1, which is, it's not a big deal. It happens often. Or if they provide and approve the change of status here in the US and you're able to go from a V visa to an O-1. And again, you even if the B visa hasn't been approved, you're showing that you filed timely and that you have attempted to keep yourself in status at all times.
Okay. How many published patents are typically helpful for a software engineer profile to qualify for O1?
It depends on how strong your other criteria are. If publishing material is one of the only ones that you will be using, I will say closer to 10. But if you have strong evidence for other criteria, I will say closer to 5.
Okay. All right. The next one says, I've passed the licensing exam for physical therapy. Will that count as one of the criteria for O1? So, does any of the exams count?
So passing an exam or getting a license doesn't really count, because especially if it's the norm in your industry, right? Like if
Mhm.
someone has to be licensed to be a physical therapist, then it's not really showing that you are at the top of your field. But there is a lot that you can do once you get a license, right? Like you
Mhm.
have the ability to create a blog and talk about, give guidance and talk about your work and healthy lifestyles, and people will take you more seriously if you have a license than if you don't have a license.
Okay. Will consistent LinkedIn posts about technology help as evidence to any specific criteria?
So directly, not necessarily, but it will definitely help with raising your visibility. The more you raise your visibility, the more other media or companies are willing and able to pick up your profile and then talk about your profile. So it is a great way to start.
Okay, but this won't be counted as the blog that you mentioned earlier. The LinkedIn posts
Just
won't
by
count as
itself,
blog.
it wouldn't count, right? You would need to be consistent, become a
Yeah.
trusted expert in the field by posting consistently, but also
Yeah.
reach out to organizations. Like my biggest advice for people who are trying to qualify for an O-1 is reach out, email,
Mhm.
podcasts. There are a lot of podcasts talking about AI right now, or talking about technology and STEM. Offer
Okay.
yourself to be a speaker. Start your own blog. Reach out to
Hmm.
people who have already established blog. Offer yourself to be featured. Reach out to nonprofits that are, let's say, promoting sciences with children from underserved backgrounds. They're always looking for experts. They're always looking for professionals.
Yep. What's the percentage of denial on O1A applications?
So the O-1 is actually one of the visas that has the highest approval rates. I will say about above 90s, about 94, 95% of the applications are approved, which is very high compared to other type of visas.
Right. So this is not considering the RFEs, like if we remove the RFEs and the approvals, is it, or is it like the final approval?
So in, so in terms of
Okay.
RFEs, it's very unlikely that they receive RFEs, but this is because attorneys usually will not take a case, will not file a case
Hmm.
unless it's very clear that the person
Yep.
meets that criteria and it's very organized.
Okay.
Um, right, so you have more, like I say, more agency on your hands
Hmm.
rather than filing for an H-1B and then the government deciding that no, this role per se, not about your credentials, but this role doesn't really meet the criteria of being a professional degree or a specialty degree, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do. Like that's the role that you're being hired for. But with the O-1, you have the ability to actually put in the work and structure the work and show your accomplishments. So, which I
Yep.
think that's the reason why it has one of the highest
Right.
approval
Right.
rates.
And related to that is the next question. What are the common pitfalls that lead to these RFEs?
When people are very general, when people pick a field or an area of expertise and they're very general, very generic, or very broad, the more specific you are, the better the chances that you have.
Mm.
Also, when people are very um, technical, very disorganized and technical, you have to remember that officers are not experts in your field. So you may know what the name of a very complicated software is and how it operates, but when you explain it to someone that doesn't have a master's in engineering or computer science, they have to have the ability to understand what you're saying. So I think that's another one that people um, mistake.
Okay. Just a couple more questions. H1B approved in 2023 and renewal in September 2026. Planning to have the first stamping in India in March 26. Oh, sorry, this is not related to O1. Okay. Given how long will I have to get a new stamp for it? Okay. I think this is not related to O1, so you can skip this. What is the minimum percentage profile readiness below which you don't accept cases for O1A filing? So, what's the minimum to even start working with a lawyer for this?
I think the minimum I will say is for people to have educational credentials, to
Mm.
have educational credentials that are solid and strong, and then to be able to articulate what your field of expertise will be, right? So, like, I wouldn't take someone that has no direction, that just graduated but has no direction on what they want to do or focus on.
Yep. So, you need to know your domain at least. What could be your domain? And have
Exactly.
the education related to that
Exactly.
domain. These are the two minimum. Okay.
And be willing to do it, because I've met students who
Mm.
have a really good educational credentials background, right? So, but they're very shy and they don't want to reach out to companies or put their work out there. There is so much I can do, so the willingness of people, the eagerness of people to put in the work
Mm.
definitely makes a big difference.
Great. Yeah. All right. I think, yeah, we can go to the profile, the case study that we have.
Awesome. So we had a case here at the firm where we had a senior clinical social worker, and she was transitioning from the H-1B to an O-1A in a field where extraordinary recognition is actually difficult to quantify. And this is, and I know this is not related to IT, but Some of the advice that we're going to talk about really relates to people in IT, and you can also implement it. Officers love to be able to quantify your success. They love numbers. So if you're in a field that doesn't really use metrics or numbers, it's more difficult, right? Like this social worker. But people in IT and STEM are well ahead, and they have this benefit of that they have the ability to quantify their contributions. So I'll give you an example. I met with a client who was a software engineer. Some of the technology that he was using or developing or helping develop was being used for clean energy. And some of the guidance that I gave him when we were meeting to build his profile is quantify your contributions. Show a chart that shows how much money your work is saving, right? Like you implemented this technology that's cooling down data centers with a more efficient type of clean energy. Pull out the data that shows not only the environmental impact, but also the money that you're saving the company, the money that you're saving the US, the money that you're saving the state, right? Pull out charts. Like some companies do have these numbers. They do have charts that they do create internally. That counts as well. That counts as well if you're able to pull out these numbers and show the impact, the money that you're saving your company or the industry or the contributions that you have. So being able to quantify and show metrics is very important, and officers love this. So the manifest approach for specifically this type of case study that we have here is that we were able to prove that she held a critical and essential role with the Organization for New Alternatives for Children. And again, talking about her contributions to the company, decision-making power, her involvement in any leadership committees or any different clubs or organizations within the company. We also were able to show that a documentary that highlighted her work. And even though, and the documentary got an Emmy, right? So, but even though she didn't get an Emmy, right? Her work was featured on a documentary that did get acclaim. So think about the way that you can use that for your own case. If your work in any way has been mentioned by, let's say, a blogger or a nonprofit, and then you're able to show, to make the connection that, hey, look, my work is being recognized or mentioned by this organization or this person, and it is trusted because their work is being highlighted by all of these industries, of they've gotten all of these awards. You can make that argument. You can make that connection. Also, we were able to showcase her publications about migrant health. And again, this is something that you can use. Think about what it means to be in the top of your field. Don't go for an industry that's extremely broad, that has a lot of competition, because then proving that you're within the top 1% of that industry is going to be very difficult. Think about the areas that are not getting a lot of attention, and then position yourself in those areas. So, for example, if you are an engineer that specializes in AI, look for different fields that are not getting a lot of attention. So, for example, being able to use AI for attorneys. Attorneys, there is such a pushback for AI just because they're trained to resist change and be very, according to the law. So look into that. Look into maybe you can develop a software that can be used by attorneys, and it could be easy to. They're also not known for being tech savvy, so make a software that's very easy to use, to utilize. There is virtually no competition in this very specific field because no one is working with people that are resistant to change or people that don't want to use AI. So something that people see as an obstacle, you can see as an opportunity. So which is why it was very helpful for her, for this social worker right here, to be writing publications about migrant health, because there is not a lot of attention on migrant health. So she was able to position herself at the top of her field. Leverage selective membership, that she was part of organizations that you had to apply and then be selected to be part of. And then the recommendation letters. And we can talk more about in detail about this, but compile strong expert letters. And what I tell clients is it's better to have 5 or 6 that are very strong from very reputable sources than to have 20. But also think about how an officer will feel if they have to read through 20 to 30 recommendation letters. They're not going to be happy. Think about how that's going to influence their mood in terms of reviewing your application, right? And we can talk more about later on about who, when it comes to choosing the people that will write your recommendation letters, who can you choose? How can you start forming those relationships? What can help you in terms of securing the best recommendation letters? And again, her application was approved because she was able to show that her work was positioning her at the top of her field. And we talked about this, but let's just do a quickly overview about the pitfalls to avoid for people who are trying to avoid a request for evidence or a denial. Like I previously mentioned, generic or weak letter recommendation are really bad. It's better to include less recommendation letters, but for them to be very strong. And then for the recommendation letters, what I tell my clients is let the attorney write them for 2 reasons. The attorney, when they're writing the recommendation letter, is thinking about the legal requirements that you need to meet. So we write those recommendations letters with that framework in mind. Number two, a distinguished BC professor is way more willing to write your recommendation letter if you approach them and you tell them, hey, my attorney will write the letter. All you have to do is take a look, approve it, and sign, rather than asking someone that's very busy to write a recommendation letter from scratch, someone who doesn't have the time. So it's just keeping this in mind. And the strongest recommendation letters that I see are for people that have not worked with you directly. So no direct managers, no co-workers, no direct professors. So in terms of building a relationship, you can still have a personal relationship, like with a person that's very accomplished in their field, that's related to your field, and then ask them to write your recommendation letter if they're familiar to your work and they can attest that your work has made an impact in your industry. Number two is an unclear work itinerary. So again, letters of intent, contracts, dates, itineraries, all of that as you have to be very organized, provide dates, possible wages, rates that you will charge when providing these services. The more clear and organized you are, the better chances you have. And number three, lack of supporting evidence. So you do need to support your arguments. When you are writing your support letter, listing all the great things that you have accomplished and how you meet all of the criteria, you have to provide evidence that backs that criteria, right? So don't provide a 40-page letter saying how amazing you are, but then provide no evidence that you actually meet those criteria. So when somebody asks about how to organize your evidence, when you're writing your support letter, you want to separate it by criteria. So for example, criteria number 1, which is the one for awards. Sure, talk about the awards, like what was the selection process, why it's impressive that you got that award, but also say see exhibit A, and also include copies of the awards, right? Like if you took pictures receiving the awards, right? Like if you have a certificate of the award, if you were featured on a flyer saying that they were going to honor you, include the evidence. Okay? Awesome. So we have officially finished the presentation, but we do have some time for questions about what we spoke about today.
All right. So we have a question. Does judging hackathons with students count, or should it be only for professionals?
They count. You can include evidence as well. It's how you package it and show the competition level, especially if you're pursuing a higher degree like a master's or a PhD. It carries more weight.
All right. Okay. So, Gabriela, do you want to tell everyone about the consultation? How can they reach out to Manifest Law and how can they, get your help and other lawyers' help for this entire process?
Of, yeah, of course. So we have a. Is able? Are you able? Is everybody able to see the link? Are
Yes,
you
I'll
okay?
also
So
put
we're
it
gonna
in the
have someone
chat.
put it in the chat.
Yeah.
And we are offering these because they joined the seminar today and they are part of your community. We don't offer free consultations for everyone. So it's very special. So you can click on the link, you can schedule your consultation with an attorney. And again, when you schedule the consultation, provide prior to the appointment as much information as you can. Copies of your resumes, copies of your educational degrees. If you can do a brief statement on your proposed field, right? Do that as well. So that when you have the consultation with an attorney, the attorney is not only prepared, but the attorney is able to use all that time to actually have a conversation with you and guide you in the best possible manner rather than using the time to learn about your profile. So it's very important to do that. And here at the firm, we have some of the most talented, incredible attorneys that have done this for many, many years and that are passionate about this work. They're not only experienced, but they're very passionate about helping students and foreign professionals build the life of their dreams here in the US.
All right, great. So, everyone, the link is right here. So, do reach out to Manifest Law, and I'm sure you'll be in good hands and they can guide you through the entire process. I think we have finished all the questions, Gabriela. So, thank you so much. This was incredibly helpful. And I think all the examples, all the nuggets that you've added here and there, that gave a really clear picture about the O1. And yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
Awesome. I had so much fun. Thank you for having us.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining. And if you have any more questions, feel free to put it in the comment section of this video, and do reach out to us if you, want to partner with Manifest Law. Also, we have an exclusive WhatsApp community just for O1, and you will find the link for that as well. So do join that WhatsApp community so that you get more updated information, more recent examples, approval information for O1, and we'll also have more resources and more webinars coming up. So you'll also be, notified of those. So we're going to put all of this information in the description box of this video. So do take a look for this. All right.